Hello and welcome to the big question on NDTV Profit. I'm Vikram Oza. Now, Delhi's air has turned toxic yet again. So toxic, it's once again forcing a pollution lockdown under GRAP 3, which is, of course, halting construction. It's curbing truck movement. It's disrupting daily business across the National Capital Region, the NCR. So clearly, now this is no longer just a seasonal or a civic issue. It's becoming an economic one. Now there are these recurring shocks hitting our productivity, our projects, and yes, indeed, our profits. According to a report, pollution-related deaths and disabilities have cost the Indian economy nearly 9.5% of our GDP. This was the figure in 2023. It's safe to assume it has gone up. It's a staggering loss of $339 billion, and that's a huge amount. Nearly 17 lakh lives have been cut short by toxic air in that particular year, in 2023. And Delhi alone is accounting for 15% of all deaths that are linked to pollution. Again, a big number. So if you look at states like Uttar Pradesh or Bihar or even Madhya Pradesh, all these states have lost close to 2% of their GDP because of air pollution. And this is the figure in 2019. Again, safe to assume that it has gone up since then. It's clearly a drag on growth that few policymakers or even businesses can afford to ignore. And in the capital, the hit is direct, it is visible. You see the smog in the city, it can't get more visible than that. The Chamber of Trade and Industry, the CII, is estimating a 2,500 crore rupee blow to Delhi's economy. This was the figure late last year. And that's when GRAP 4 came into play. So 2,500 crore rupees, ladies and gentlemen, that's a 20% loss in business. Daily footfalls in businesses crashing, weddings, events postponed, and supply chain disruptions are taking place. Another study just a couple of years ago, it finds that the cost of air pollution to Indian businesses in just 4 months has been 7 lakh crore rupees. And that means it is almost 43% of the impact of what we've seen as part of the COVID lockdown. So the figures are making it quite obvious that air pollution is not just killing people, it is hurting profits, it's hurting productivity, and India's growth momentum could be dampened. Which is why tonight we're asking that all-important question. Now, as the capital chokes again and economic activity is slowing down, now the question is quite obvious. Is climate risk a cost of doing business in India? And as we tackle this, as we go beyond the health hazards associated with pollution, how much do businesses have to factor in the impact of pollution on those bottom lines? To discuss this, we have an excellent panel joining us. Let me introduce you to them. Noted environmentalist Debbie Goenka is joining us on this discussion. Also with us is Parth Kumar. He's the program manager of the industry unit. He's from the Center for Science and Environment. And there they are. Ashish Grover is also with us, the General Secretary at CIT, the Confederation of All India Traders, and Madhvi Arora, for an economist perspective, the lead economist at MK Global Financial Services. But let me first begin by asking Debbie Goenka, sir, in your opinion, from what has been in the past by way of the impact of pollution in Delhi, are we still concentrating on the health hazards, or are businesses now looking at the kind of impact that pollution has made and continues to make?
Well, first of all, I think more than the economic costs of air pollution, I think there are 2 or 3 fundamental principles we need to take into account. When somebody is sick or somebody dies prematurely, it's not a price that the government is paying, it is a price that the individual and his family are paying. And in fact, the way the whole GDP thing works is actually, if I'm hospitalized and I pay hospital bills, I pay doctor bills, I buy medicine, that actually adds to the GDP growth figure. So that's a very peculiar situation we find ourselves in, that the real damage is not being accounted for, but in fact, getting cured is actually adding to the GDP growth that we are all, government seems to be interested in chasing. And I think if you factor in the cost of health and premature death, that figure may actually be greater than the loss that has been quantified for businesses. The second point, of course, is that businesses can't run without people. And we are now actually seeing a trend where people are being encouraged to move out of Delhi during winter months if they can afford to do so. And unfortunately, of course, not many people can afford to actually shift out for 3 months of the year and keep their jobs and kids in school and so on and so forth. And this is, of course, a huge price that people are then paying, that they have to suffer the air pollution and then risk all the associated impacts. And thirdly, of course, obviously, businesses are also suffering financially. And if their employees and workers can't come to work, obviously their productivity also suffers. And as we all know, a sick person's productivity in any case is not never going to be 100% of
True.
his normal productivity.
Yes. Parth, do weigh in on this. We've seen estimates of higher than 7 lakh crore rupees in business losses from air pollution. Yes, indeed. The impact on health, on people's lives is quite deep. And like we're hearing from Devi Goenka as well, this is going to have far-reaching impact on how people work. But how much does this kind of drag actually show up in GDP growth, in productivity, in labor output? If you look at this at a macro level, from your perspective, how deep is the impact?
The impact is pretty much, I would say, because India currently and the whole world in that sense is under a transition towards a greener economy. And especially developing countries like India are fighting not only with climate change, but local issues like air pollution as well. So, for example, in Delhi NCR, the industries are not allowed to burn coal as a fuel as well. So the alternate fuels available for industries are expensive fuels. For example, natural gas. If an industry adopts natural gas, it is much, much higher in cost compared to coal. Even biomass, which is another cleaner fuel, designated as an approved fuel in the NCR region, the price is rising like anything. Then you also talk about number of regulations that are coming in and a lot of compliance that the industries and companies have to now go for environment, which is good. But there is an added cost to that as well. Every regulation demands a certain amount of compliance, certain reports that have to be submitted. All businesses now have in-house environment teams which are working on that, which are growing in numbers. But what we need to do is to consolidate these policies and these compliances and make them as simpler as possible. Then, of course, we should also talk about the cost of health of the workers that are working inside the industry.
Absolutely.
Today we are talking about how this is impacting the health of the people in a particular month. But workers who are working inside the industry face these kind of conditions throughout the year. And I'm talking especially about industries which are in smaller scale and medium scale, which sometimes do not come with such good pollution control equipments as well. Definitely, I mean, pollution is creating a havoc in that sense and rising the cost to a great extent, not only for the industries and companies, but also for the end users in that sense. Yeah.
So, I mean, we are understanding the overall, the macro level impact. But Ashish Grover, when we're talking about businesses and the kind of impact, when you have pollution curbs, you have a GRAP 3 or a GRAP 4, this time of the year, now it's become natural. It's kind of baked in. So are businesses also baking it in? They're factoring in the kind of pollution curbs that will happen on logistics business, construction, all of that. All of them seem to take a hit. Now, how are businesses working with the kind of impact that comes because of pollution and the curbs that are put?
डेफिनेटली ओवरऑल हर चीज में बहुत फर्क आता है. जैसे कि कोई भी बिजनेस आप ले लीजिए, हर एक चीज एक दूसरे से अटैच है. और अगर कंस्ट्रक्शन नहीं होगी तो उसका सेल नहीं होगा. जो इक्विपमेंट्स हैं उसकी सेल नहीं होगी. जो रिक्वायरमेंट्स रिलेटेड टू कंस्ट्रक्शन है उसका सेल नहीं होगा. इवन आप लोकल मार्केट्स में अगर आप जाएंगे, आज अगर हम मेडिसिन मार्केट में है या दिल्ली 6 या ओवरऑल होलसेल मार्केट्स हैं, पॉल्यूशन आज से नहीं है, काफी टाइम से है और रह रहा है. इसके ऊपर काफी वर्किंग हो रही है इसको कम करने के लिए और जो भी इसको सॉल्व किया जा सकता है. लेकिन ओवरऑल बिजनेस कम होता है क्योंकि लोग बाहर नहीं निकलते हैं, लोग अपनी पहले हेल्थ को देखते हैं. और ओवरऑल जो है कहीं ना कहीं ये चीज ऑनलाइन को भी डाइवर्ट हो रही है. हालांकि सब्जेक्ट नहीं है लेकिन मैं बता रहा हूँ कि ये ऑनलाइन पे क्यों जा रहा है, बिकॉज ऑफ सर्टेन थिंग्स. तो बिजनेस को बहुत ज्यादा इफेक्ट होता है क्योंकि आज अगर किसी की हेल्थ, सबसे पहले उसकी हेल्थ है. अगर हेल्थ ठीक है तो वो काम भी करेगा, उसकी एफिशिएंसी भी रहेगी और उसका आउटपुट भी निकलेगा. लेकिन पॉल्यूशन की वजह से ये सब चीजें कहीं ना कहीं इफेक्ट हो रही हैं और इसका सॉल्यूशन बहुत जरूरी है। अभी से पोल्यूशन ही है, पोल्यूशन हर साल रहता है और दिन ब दिन ये बढ़ भी रहा है, तो इसका कोई ना कोई सॉल्यूशन निकलना बहुत जरूरी है।
So solution nikalna, and that is something that I'm guessing the powers that be are working on. But in the meantime, Madhvi, as an economist, I'm just wondering how India should be trying to integrate climate and environmental risks into financial disclosures. Now, ESG reporting, risk statements in balance sheets, all of these need to be factored in. Investors can price that risk more accurately once you have that kind of information more available. Is that happening now? How much of that do you see taking place?
So I think companies are now taking into account, these costs in their own, estimation of net present value of their projects. Of course, they're also, I think, keeping in account the fact that these environmental hazards are actually leading to much higher cost overall, or could lead to a higher cost overall, something that probably was not priced in as much, say a decade ago. But that's, happening at the margin. I'm not saying that, it's across the board. Companies are still complying to that. Wherever there's a more cleaner way of putting these costs into their books, I think some of them are doing that, but it's not across the board as yet. And thus, to that extent, I think the company's expected earnings are, or medium term, impact in terms of their profitability is still high compared to what it could turn out to be if environmental hazards continue to be a big problem.
So what I'm getting from, yes, go on,
Yeah.
Madhvi, you want to complete that thought?
Yeah, I was just simply saying that as you were talking about other factors like lost productivity, depletion of natural resources, capex delays, cost overruns, restoration cost for companies. You're seeing that I think I remember last year when the NHPC hydropower project was, faced massive losses because of the Uttarakhand landslide, something that they may not have really kept in account, as even an environmental risk in their own cost estimation or their medium-term outlook for the project. So clearly these tend to lead to massive project delays. They lead to, higher escalation cost, massive overrun in terms of, their own expenses. So all of that, I think, companies don't take into account either, nor are they taking into account the fact that some of them who are essentially, party to these environmental regulation, worsening of environment, are not necessarily fully complying either. So I don't think that the Green Tribunal is actually able to sort of tap companies fully in terms of penalties and fines as well. So I think that's still an ongoing process.
So we haven't been able to create that ecosystem yet, whether it's on the reporting front, on the compliance front. Parth Kumar is agreeing on that, but there we go, Inka, since we're talking about businesses and compliances, what about the policy front? Is there enough of the policy push to kind of stay ahead of this curve, the pollution risks that are rising right now, to kind of factor that in and say at a policy front, we need to do more urban transport, we need to kind of get greener fuel in. Is that moving at pace, or you think we are lagging in a big way?
This problem of air pollution and acute air pollution in Delhi has been, I think, going on for the past 25 years. The fact that even a parliament session is being held in Delhi in winter means that even our members of parliament are going to be exposed to this high degree of pollution. And this has been happening for the past 25 odd years. The fact that nothing is being done about it itself shows you that there's a complete lack of vision and a complete lack of policy at the highest levels of government. The courts have been trying, and various kind of orders have been passed from time to time. But clearly, even these orders are not effectively working on the ground. So really what is required is a complete shift in the thinking of our decision makers.
Yes.
They have to treat this as a top priority item, because the air pollution in Delhi, of course, is acute, but other parts of the country are also suffering equally.
It's true.
And unless we actually integrate what we call national resource accounting into a national budget, financial budget, and we factor in these gains and losses, and loss of natural capital, the loss to industry and so on, the government is not going to take this seriously.
So in fact,
but the moment we start factoring in these costs and the GDP growth then coming down dramatically, then perhaps government would wake up to the reality of the problem and the magnitude.
So we don't have the numbers. Even now, we were looking for the most recent data and we were struggling to get that. Parth Kumar, when we're talking about fixes for the problem that we're seeing and that is at hand, from a legal policy standpoint, I want to ask you if India's environmental regulations, are we talking about weak enforcement, or are we looking at sharper, more market-linked incentives, taking away from what Madhvi is also suggesting over here, for cleaner industry compliance? Where is the lag right now, according to you, on a policy front? If you look at it from a legal policy standpoint, where do we stand and what do we need to do?
So I would say there are policies out there, but there is also significant lag of policies as well. For example, I will talk about three basic components in an industrial level. There are the thermal power plants who policy on SOx emissions have been backtracked in very recently by the government. So that is continuing. We have almost 11 coal-based thermal power plants in and around NCR, which are still operating. Now, the second biggest problem is the implementation. The huge number of small and medium industries we have in NCR. CSE did a study back in 2021, and we had found that all the industries in NCR are mostly small and medium scale with small boilers. Good that we have changed the fuel to a cleaner one, but do we have the pollution control equipments in place? For larger industries, we have the SEMS system, which is the online monitoring of pollutants from industries. But is all the SEMS data coming on the portals completely reliable? Can action be taken based on that data? So implementation and policy, both places we need to work on simultaneously, and implementation is a big challenge, I would say, when it comes down to policy and industries on the ground.
How big is the implementation challenge, Mr. Grover, from your perspective, for businesses to be able to comply with all the laws, everything that has been put down already? Perhaps there needs to be a bigger policy push, like Debbie Goenka is pointing out, Parth is pointing out as well. But from a business perspective, कितना मुश्किल होगा ये सब implement करने में, क्योंकि businesses will have to factor in extra costs, and that perhaps becomes a sticky point as well. Yeah, the costs in the long term may be higher, but in the short term, businesses may not want to take this on. Is that some resistance coming through from the business side?
देखिए, लॉज आर देयर, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की ही दिक्कत होती है, लेकिन उसको इम्प्लीमेंटेशन करने के जो बॉडीज बनी है वो स्ट्रिक्टली उसको फॉलो अप नहीं करती हैं, ना ही करवा पाती हैं। और एक प्रॉब्लम हमारे यहाँ ये है कि हमारे को राइट्स मालूम है, ड्यूटीज नहीं मालूम है। हमें भी पार्टिसिपेट करना पड़ेगा। अगर कोई इंडस्ट्री लग रही है, उसके लिए बायलॉजेस हैं और उसको कोई इक्विपमेंट लगाना है और नहीं लगा रहा है, तो उसको कौन देखेगा? और नहीं लगता है तो वो वैसे ही चल रहा है, तो पॉल्यूशन उससे भी बढ़ रहा है। इसी तरह अभी लास्ट दिवाली निकली है, दिवाली के अंदर क्रैकर्स के लिए अनाउंस हुआ था, ग्रीन क्रैकर्स चलने हैं, 2 घंटे चलने हैं। क्रैकर्स चले, बहुत ज्यादा चले, हम लोगों ने ही चलाए, तो अल्टीमेटली पॉल्यूशन को बढ़ाने में पार्टिसिपेशन हमारा ही है। इसी तरह इंडस्ट्रीज के अंदर अगर इंडस्ट्री लग रही है, स्मॉल स्केल है या मीडियम स्केल है, तो उनके बायलॉज को फुलफिल कौन करेगा? जो इंडस्ट्री लगा रहा है, 10% लोग उसको फुलफिल कर रहे हैं, मैं बिल्कुल ओपनली कहूंगा, बाकी लोग नहीं कर रहे हैं। तो जो बॉडीज हैं जो उसको देखते हैं या उसकी सर्वेलेंस करते हैं, वो उसको नहीं कर रहे हैं। और इसी तरह दिल्ली के अंदर और आसपास एरियाज के जो इंडस्ट्रीज लग रही हैं, वो फुलफिल नहीं करने की वजह से पॉल्यूशन क्रिएट कर दी है और अल्टीमेटली बिजनेस का लॉस भी हो रहा है।
So the policy front, the implementation front, all of that is in play. Madhvi, from your understanding, the push that needs to come either from the fiscal policy perspective, whether you're talking about monetary policy, higher insurance premiums, is that something that we're looking at? Credit risk assessments, is that something that is on our minds? Infrastructure planning, how much of that is going to come into play as we go ahead? Because there are global standards as well in terms of trying to mitigate the risk coming through from air pollution. How do you go about doing it from an economist's perspective?
See, from the policymakers' point of view, they just have to ensure that, these are getting, companies are actually complying to that. I'm not a specialist in the subject, so I wouldn't be able to really tell you as to what the regulatory impositions would be. But I think from the policy point of view, they'll have to keep into account two factors. One is, the indirect cost, economic indirect cost that is going to actually come to the fiscal side of the economy, especially the healthcare costs, right? The pollution-related illness are basically going to, as we were mentioning, the significant premature deaths. Policymakers obviously will have to ensure that somewhere the cost of the expenses on health and all of these things actually tends to go up or needs to go up, in the fiscal side. The productivity loss, of course, also has to be taken into account from the growth point of view, which again will imply that the output loss from the demand side or the supply side, both from the private sector, would have to be compensated by the fiscal side in terms of much more spending. The natural resource depletion is also a problem with regard to degradation of land, water, forest resources and stuff like that, which also is actually a loss to certain states, because certain states which are rich in natural resources, will not be able to enjoy the dividend. So it will also lead to a lower, economic activity or production side of the economy would also get hurt. So all of that, and say even industries like tourism, for example, could also get specifically hurt. All of that will have a GDP impact, which from the fiscal side will have to be compensated, because the private sector is not able to generate that kind of growth. The public sector will have to take on the baton. So I think to that extent, I think the fiscal cost would be much more than what is visibly seen at this point in time, which will be more indirect in nature, where the impact on resources, labor, development, loss of productivity, agricultural losses, healthcare cost, decreased life expectancy, all of that will also have to be somewhere accounted for, in the fiscal side, where policymakers will have to take a much, bigger role to play in terms of growth outcomes versus otherwise.
Interesting. There we go, Inka. This entire debate between public sector and private sector, who's going to take the onus on this? Where is the onus going to be now? Coming at a stage when we're talking about a hit that has already taken place, and the potential of further hits is going to be quite substantial. So if you had to give out a message to India Inc., the importance of clean air right now, and they making it a priority, what would you be telling India Inc. today?
I think India Inc. has to get its act together, and I think the top business leaders of the country have to actually try and submit a memorandum to the Prime Minister and get him to actually make sure that the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and so on that he kicked off many years ago is actually working on the ground. And 2 or 3 points I want to make. My colleague mentioned the issue of thermal power plants. You'd be shocked to know that last month, the Environment Ministry has actually decided to reduce the requirement of putting in the flue gas desulfurization plant on thermal power plants, which was supposed to absorb sulfur dioxide and so on, which is one of the major polluters being emitted from a power plant. The second thing, of course, is that industry is just one contributor to the pollution. We're not really discussing the impact of construction. We're not looking at the impact of the transport and vehicular pollution and so on. And the third and most important point is all the pollution in Delhi is not being originating from Delhi. There are also pollution sources from outside the city.
Indeed.
And unfortunately, when it comes to Haryana and Punjab and other states, then it gets lost in the political kutta bilika to kind of dialogue.
Yes.
And nothing actually happens.
Correct. So now, Parth Kumar, if pollution is both an environmental and an economic emergency, I want to ask you what you think could be one policy change that could bridge this gap between environmental compliance and continuity of business.
One point I really want to highlight, Vikram, here is that I think one big lag which I could not mention was also the capacity of our regulators. Currently at the scale we are growing, and at the scale our industries are growing, it is very, very difficult for our pollution control boards or any other authorities to individually monitor industries or any such businesses. So we need to come up with more efficient technologies and systems and centralized infrastructure, centralized boilers or stuff like that, which is much more efficient and easy to monitor, which also reduces the compliance cost for the businesses as well as for the government as well. So we need to pitch in and be more innovative with our compliances and also with the monitoring systems which we have been following traditionally. So be it drones being used for monitoring, be it a common boiler or a common effluent treatment plant, how can we up our compliance systems and move ahead of the traditional compliance and regulatory and monitoring systems which we have been following, because the kind of growth we are seeing, it becomes very difficult to match up to
Yes.
the capacity of our regulators.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there's no taking away from the fact that this is a problem that needs to be addressed here and now. We've heard the takes, the numbers are speaking for themselves. Pollution is clearly not just a public health crisis. It's becoming a big drag on growth, on productivity, and investor confidence. And it is this kind of cyclical impact that we are talking about. It needs to be addressed, whether it's a hit to business or a loss to GDP. Right now, India is not at a point where we can separate our economic ambitions from our environmental realities. The challenge, and of course, there is the opportunity for India Inc. to see clean air and climate resilience not as compliance, but as a matter of competitiveness. It's going to be an important ask for the future. I want to thank my guests for joining us on the show. Debbie Goenka, Parth Kumar, Madhvi Arora, Ashish Grover. Thank you very much for joining us with your very sharp insights on the subject. An important matter, and we hope to take this up even further. Yes, indeed, it is going beyond being a health hazard. The quality of our air is falling, and rapidly at that. What can we do to arrest the problem is one point in time. How our business is going to tackle it in the future is something we are watching very closely. I'm Vikram Oza from me and the team on The Big Question here on NDTV Profit. Thank you for joining us.